It seems like every week when I make one of these videos, I start doing research into something or other in order to make the video, and I always lead back to looking into and citing a portion of the Constitution. Usually it comes from the Bill of Rights, but I've also looked into the articles and some of the other amendments that are written into the Constitution. In fact, when I look through my browser history and I see how many times I've been to the Cornell Law School's website pertaining to constitutional articles and amendments, I feel like if I keep going to this website, Cornell University is going to have to start charging me tuition and eventually get me a degree. But right now, we are looking at something that's not actually explained in the Constitution. We're looking at a situation where we are actually going to have to make a constitutional precedent, and a new amendment might have to come out of the situation, depending on what happens, what the courts decide, and what we decide to do about it going forward. Our president may be indicted in a lower court, and nobody knows right now if he actually can be indicted. But we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video. Before we talk about the indictment, whether or not it's possible or anything that's in the Constitution, let's first have a look at how we got from 2016 to what we're finding out about this past week. And I can't really say it the best, so let's go ahead and let Hillary say it for us.
Secretary Clinton, I want to clear up your position on this issue because in a speech you gave to a Brazilian bank for which you were paid $225,000, we've learned from the WikiLeaks that you said this, and I want to quote, "My dream is a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders." So that's the question. That's the question. Please quiet, everybody. Is that your dream, open borders?
Well, if you went on to read the rest of the sentence, I was talking about energy. You know, we trade more energy with our neighbors than we trade with the rest of the world combined. And I do want us to have an electric grid, an energy system that crosses borders. I think that will be a great benefit to us. But you are very clearly quoting from WikiLeaks. And what's really important about WikiLeaks is that the Russian government has engaged in espionage against Americans. They have hacked American websites, American accounts of private people, of institutions. Then they have given that information to WikiLeaks for the purpose of putting it on the internet. This has come from the highest levels of the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself, in an effort, as 17 of our intelligence agencies have confirmed, to influence our election. So I actually think the most important question of this evening, Chris, is finally, will Donald Trump admit and condemn that the Russians are doing this and make it clear that he will not have the help of Putin in this election, that he rejects Russian espionage against Americans, which he actually encouraged in the past. Those are the questions we need answered. We've never had anything like this happen in any of our elections before.
Of course, over the last 2 years, we've heard almost nothing but Russian collusion and Russia and WikiLeaks and the Mueller investigation trying to tie this all together to Julian Assange and show us how Donald Trump intentionally allied with the Russians in order to steal the election away from the rightful owner, Hillary Clinton. But let's not forget where the first accusation of this came from, even before it originated in the House and the investigation was started into Trump. Anytime you go onto Twitter or any other form of mainstream social media these days, especially on days in which our president has used his Twitter platform, you are going to find a person who is on the left who wants to stand back and cite the fact that there have been a countless number of indictments and a smaller number of guilty pleas coming from the indictments that were all handed down from the Robert Mueller investigation. And this is actually true. Every one of their claims can be verified. There was an indictment or a guilty plea or a conviction that came out of it. But the problem with all of these indictments, convictions, and guilty pleas is the fact that none of them actually refer to the original portion of the investigation. After 2 years of an unlimited investigation that has unlimited resources being funneled into it, and with the House of Representatives funneling more support and resources into the investigation to make sure that it doesn't close, the majority of what Robert Mueller has in this investigation thus far that he's put forward are either unrelated crimes to the original charge that he is supposed to be investigating, or process crimes into the charge that he thus far does not seem to have any proof to. The majority of the charges that have been levied against the subjects of the Mueller investigation have involved processes to the Mueller investigation itself. Perjury or lying to the FBI or otherwise obstructing justice have been the vast majority of all of the charges that have been levied. But there have also been charges that have been unearthed and opened up, such as a 10-year-old tax fraud charge that was levied against Paul Manafort during the course of the investigation into Trump-Russia collusion, in which Manafort spent 2 weeks in jail here in Wisconsin to pay for his crimes against the state. But lately it seems like there have been plea deals and other gifts that have been given from the Mueller investigation, including the case of Michael Flynn, in which Mueller recommended that there be no jail time for Flynn when he was convicted, and that seems to be a trade for political favors. From the outside, it almost looks like Mueller is trying to get the people that he's investigated to flip after he's found other dirt on them outside of the scope of the investigation, to try and get them to sing like a canary and say that Trump colluded with Russia or otherwise has had problems. But campaign finance law is campaign finance law, and with Cohen's statement, the DA for the Southern District of New York has decided that he has enough evidence that he can carry forward charges against the current sitting president. We have gone from colluding with Russia down to a campaign finance violation. And at this point, when we look at the evidence, one of the things that the investigation and the charges hinge on is whether or not intent can be proven in the case of the campaign finance law, because it is a very gray area considering Trump's past life before the presidency and things that he is known for doing before that. But what this has done is brought up a very interesting argument that in 242 years we have not had to have yet, even though many people on both sides have accused the other side of needing to have this done. We have not yet had to have this argument, but the argument is clear. Can a sitting president be indicted by a lower court? News sources from both sides of the aisle are hotly debating this issue from both sides, and it seems that there is no consensus, and most of the ideas seem to fall along partisan lines. Constitutional lawyer and Daily Wire contributor Ben Shapiro seems to believe that no, a sitting president cannot be indicted. We have processes written into the Constitution, even though they're not very clear at the moment as to whether or not we can put a president into jail after indicting, charging, and convicting him. However, Melissa Murray, a constitutional law professor and a former law clerk for Justice Sotomayor, seems to believe that no man should be above the law, and yes, we can absolutely indict the president from a lower court. But the outline for our government, the Constitution, does not provide any clear detail as to yes or no whether or not the president can be indicted. There's nothing in any of the articles or any of the amendments that talk about that. Oddly enough, the only real place in our founding documents in which this idea was ever discussed is in Federalist 69 and Federalist 77. In Federalist 69, Alexander Hamilton lays out the case against providing a lower court indictment to any elected official, either federal or state or local. In fact, he points out the fact that there is a process involved in charging an elected official with crimes. It is called impeachment, and we've talked about it on this channel before, in which the House of Representatives draws up the charges against the elected official, and that official is tried in the Senate. Upon conviction, it is required to have 2/3 of a vote of both chambers of Congress to remove the official from office, where he would at that point be subject to investigation, indictment, and conviction. But the Federalist Papers are not the Constitution, and therefore we can't rely on them for a decision to be made. Yes, the Supreme Court can use the citation of Federalist 69 in order to make their decision as to whether or not a sitting president can be indicted, but it is not a legally binding document that would control and sway it one way or another. And it seems that the Southern District of New York has taken this into account, because they actually have not indicted the president yet, instead waiting for him to leave office, hopefully by 2020 in their eyes, because by 2024 the statute of limitations would be up on campaign finance, and they would have no grounds in order to make the indictment for him. With the Sixth Amendment in mind, I am obviously bothered by the fact that the district believes that they have the evidence to form an indictment, but are waiting until after the presidency to do so. Whereas in any other case, they would have made the indictment right away, and Trump would have had his right to a speedy trial. This is especially bothersome to me because of the fact that this is going to dominate the news for the next 2 years. Because of that, Trump is going to have a very hard time exercising the other right that's laid out for him in the Sixth Amendment, the right to have a trial by an unbiased jury of his peers. If this is on the news for the next 2 years, I would have a hard time finding a jury pool that is not tainted in one way or the other, that would be able to come together and hear this case without already having heard all of it all throughout the mainstream news. And of course, the seemingly partisan nature of these charges leaves us open for jury stacking, especially in the district in which this would be tried. One thing I can say for certain about this presidency, especially in the light of these indictments, is the fact that we have been challenged as citizens of this country to know as much about the Constitution as we possibly can, because we are bombarded by it on a daily basis. And it's important to note the fact that the founders did leave the Constitution open to amendment in case we did come across something that was not expressly written out in the Articles of the Constitution. We can make a case law about it, we can find the best way to deal with it, and we can enshrine it into constitutional law so that further generations have a how-to guide in order to deal with things like this. This is, of course, the reason that our Constitution has stood the test of time for 242 years, and short of another major civil war in which we destroy each other, can continue on for generations to come. Do you think that the president can be indicted? And do you think he had intent when he was making campaign finance violations? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.